Since Harvey hit, 3,000 Red Cross disaster workers have served more than 690,000 meals and snacks, provided medical and mental health services for about 21,000 people, also distributed 30,000 relief items that includes diapers, personal items, as well as other things for those people forced from their homes.
All right, for more on the emergency response, I'm joined by Mark Neveau, president at M.A.N Ventures and a former FEMA coordinating officer. Mark, thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Is this the new reality? I mean, we got these Red Cross workers heading to Florida. We had Bay Area first responders going to Texas. It just seems like FEMA and these disaster agencies are busier than ever.
I think busier than ever, but also after Katrina, the post-reform Katrina Act mandated some changes that came into place, which I think we're now seeing the benefactor of that. It took some time. We're seeing more resources, what we call lean forward, meaning that we're going to pre-position assets, resources, meals ready to eat, water truckloads of that in federal bases so that they can be dispersed to the disaster area much quicker than before.
Yeah, talk about that, because I was at Katrina and I just got back from Houston, and I noticed a big difference in the way there was a response. Katrina, there were people that were still lingering out there without any assistance days after the hurricane had passed. Skies were clear. They were stuck on a highway overpass waiting for help.
Yes.
But in Houston, it was a whole different story. So was Katrina kind of the lessons learned that we're not going to let that happen again?
Yes and no. I mean, that mandated some congressional changes. For instance, the head of FEMA's got to be a certified emergency manager. The last one came from Florida, as a matter of fact. The current one came from Alabama. So those are important changes. But also some things took place was that a lot of the folks from the West Coast FEMA offices were relocated by virtue of going to headquarters in Washington, D.C. And California is known for being able to manage disasters under the wildfires, and we implement the incident command system. What took place was, during the presidential transition with Obama, a number of these folks were transitioned to headquarters and implemented some of these incident command system. And it was a sea change. It was hard for people to adapt to, but that is probably one of the biggest changes that's allowed us to be more centralized, move forward, and be more efficient at what we do.
So basically, it's California's model that is being used by FEMA, because I know in fighting wildfires, if you go out there, there's a big operation on a big fire. They got semi-trucks out there, they got sleeping quarters, they have porta potties, they have hot food being served to these firefighters who are working 24/7 out there. That's the model that has been put in place for the federal government?
Absolutely, with some changes where they also have to be more compassionate in terms of human needs. Certainly fires are more acute. They've got to react quicker. But in a case like this where we've got long-term recovery, there's got to be housing units, there's got to be able to assistance. For instance, in Houston, there's 185,000 people that have aid right now, and there's about $137 million already out to those folks for housing, for apartments, hotels, etc. That's moving the machine much quicker than has been done before.
So what do we need to know about Irma? Because this could be a big disaster for Florida and other parts of the East Coast.
No question. The good news is that Florida is positioned to be able to handle some of this. For instance, they've dealt with 4 hurricanes in 2004, a lot of lessons learned. Their infrastructure is much greater than it was before. For instance, in the gas stations, if you have more than 8 pumps, you've got to have an emergency generator. That's not always the case in a lot of states. So they're thinking about evacuation. In March of this year, the emergency manager, Brian Kuhn, who came from Walmart as an emergency manager, we were down in we were down at Daytona Beach talking about preparing for a Category 4 hurricane. So they're doing preparation as well. They're pre-positioning resources down into the Virgin Islands in anticipation of the hit there. You know, we're talking about Florida, but we also have area of the United States that is outside the continental United States that we have to be concerned with.
So you were with FEMA for about 6 years. You're not officially with FEMA anymore. You're still in the disaster relief business. So you can speak a little candidly about FEMA. What do they need to work on to get even better? They're making a lot of progress, but what else could they do?
I think as we get through the presidential transition, and also what's going to be a challenge here is the economy. You know, we're talking about probably the largest disaster in terms of dollars in Houston, and depending upon what happens here, right on the heels of that could be a Category 5 hurricane. Well, what is that going to look like to the country in terms of resource usage and also economy? We have to be concerned about that in terms of how do we manage that. If we're not putting dollars into preparedness or some security because we have to transfer it over to response and rebuild, how does that position us for what may potentially come down the road?
All right, Mark Neveau, thank you very much for your time and your expertise. Appreciate it. Heather.